Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture Crop Talk webinar. If you have any questions today, please type them into the Q&A icon located at the bottom toolbar, and we'll answer them at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Lori. Morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome everybody to the September 13 edition of Crop Talk. And on today's Crop Talk, what we're going to do is I'm going to give just a little bit of an update, and then we've had some questions come in that thought we'd spend time just with the crop scouting panel and going over some of the questions and trying to get as many of them answered as we can. So I guess with that, I'm going to start on the update and I guess when we look at the past week, we had actually a pretty reasonable or good week of harvest. We had a couple of kind of rain days, I guess you'd call them. They were light showers that kept guys out of the field for maybe a day. I think guys were back in the fields, but on the cereal crops, it was hard to get them to dry down because they would just get into that range where guys were comfortable putting it into air bins, and then we'd get another shower go through. So there was a lot of cereal crops, especially wheat, coming off towards the end of the week and actually the beginning of this week in that 18 range, 19 range. So I think some of that stuff might be going through grain dryers and stuff for guys. We also had our first frost in some areas over this couple days ago, I guess a couple of mornings ago, and it got down to -1, -2. I think the savior of it all was only for about an hour, maybe a little better than an hour in most areas. So I don't think it did a lot of damage. We were just talking before we started the webinar today, and guys, everybody's been kind of saying that even the tomatoes didn't freeze yet. So the frost wasn't hard enough to do a lot of damage, and would be really surprised if it did any quality damage to any of the crop out there. So when you look at our harvest progression, big jump from last week in a lot of areas. I guess last week in the winter wheat and fall rye, we were around 100% complete, and that's I think that harvest is done. We're actually in the seeding part of that program right now, and I think a lot of producers that are planning on winter wheat and fall rye have got a lot of it in right now, unless some people are waiting for a specific field to seed it on. But right now, a lot of that's in. I've actually was in a couple of fields that the fall rye and winter wheat is coming up and through the ground already. So that's good to see. Get a nice early start for next year. When you look at our cereal crops, spring wheat, big jumps in a lot of the areas, and a lot of producers got a lot of it taken off over the past week. And you get for the province, we're over 80% complete. There are pockets that still have a fair bit of wheat to take off yet, and there are some areas that producers are taking it off, like I mentioned, a little bit on the tough side to get it done. But there's a lot of wheat that's been taken off over the last week. Same with the barley. Again, a lot of barley taken off. I think when you look in some areas where the percentages may be a little bit lower, a lot of guys are trying to get the wheat off and letting the barley sit so they can get the wheat off. Probably more because of the concerned about quality issues, and so not as much concerned about the quality issues in barley and oats. So you can see those two crops where there wasn't a big change in percentage on a lot of those from the previous week. But the wheat acres definitely were ones that showed the biggest improvement over the past week. Field peas, again, they've been complete for a while here. Truthfully, I can actually say there was a field I seen yesterday that still wasn't harvested, but I would say we're pretty close to 100% done in most areas. Canola is the next crop that everybody seems to be jumping at, and it's kind of just getting into that stage where it's kind of a go for most producers. Getting dry in the field, surprisingly dry. You look at some of that straw that's out there, and and the height of the crop and the green material left behind. It seems surprising that the sample is as dry as it is, but you can see right there we're at 35% as a province, and in most areas in that that minimum of that 15 to 20% complete. But a lot of canola is going to be taken off over the next few days here. Looking at the weather forecast, it's going to be looks to be like good harvest. I think there's only maybe one day of rain that they might be talking about. So besides that, I think the harvest weather is going to be good. Looking at soybeans, which will be the crop that's probably the least amount harvested right now, and I think we're seeing some early varieties starting to really drop leaves and starting to look like they're getting ready to harvest. And we've had some early harvest being done on soybeans. So again, a lot of crop going to be coming off in this next week here, and I could see only those numbers jumping again by the end for our next crop report. So when you look at it for, I guess, the province and the amount of harvest completed, we sit at about 51% complete across the province, which is ahead of our 5-year average, which was about 42%. So that's good. We're ahead of the game, but we probably should have expected that. Being that the year seems to be going by fast and crops seem to be maturing faster this year, and so things are, I guess, on a general perspective, as we were going through the year, we were thinking it was going to be an early harvest, so we are a bit ahead of the 5-year average. As I mentioned, the harvest continues in spring wheat and cereal crops. Barley 81% complete, oats 83% complete, and spring wheat 85% complete is for the province, which again is pretty good for this time of year. Spring wheat yields, there's a pretty wide range this year, and it really depends on where you were when the rains came, or if you did get the rains, or if you were in one of those areas where the rains were normal, then you're looking at some pretty good yields. We've been hearing, some as high as the 90s, but I would say that, a good 70 bushel is something that a lot of producers are looking at. There are areas, however, and those are the areas that didn't receive the rains, where we're hearing lows from as low as 16 to, probably more in that 25 to 30 bushel range. So definitely a big range in yields this year, and it's showing from the information that's coming in. Protein levels, really good. Even in the dry areas, the protein levels are high. So minimums 13.5s. I've heard as high as 16s in some places, and a lot of it grade. The wheat is still grading 1 and 2. So again, still good quality. I think the biggest thing we might be seeing over the next little while here is, and what I've seen in the last about 3 or 4 days here, is we're starting to see some bleaching of some of the cereals, and I can see that's why producers are wanting to get a lot of the wheat off as quick as they can here, because probably more of a downgrading factor in wheat than it is in some of the other crops. So it's producers have been working hard at that to get it off, and you can see the quality rating of our spring wheat is it really hasn't changed a lot since we started putting this up, but I think we're going to see some areas where if the wheat stays out too much longer, we're going to see some more quality differences in the next couple of weeks here. Looking at oats, yields have been probably average. It's when you look at 90 to 130 as the highs, and highs up to 170, well, that 170 would definitely be above average, but 90 to 130 probably average for the province. And quality of the oats, I've been hearing some really good test weights, 42s, 45s, so really good there. Even in the dry areas, we're seeing some of the oats still, getting close to that 60 bushels an acre, which, for some of those areas, I think that might be even a little bit of a surprise for some of those producers because, we were definitely looking at some poor looking crops, some thin crops, and we just didn't see some of those yields coming. Barley yields again, 70 to 100 bushels an acre, in some cases higher. And again, most of the barley that's come off has been pretty good quality, really good test weight again this year. And again, we're starting to see some yellowing of some of the kernels right now and some of the stuff that sat through a few rains. And, it's just a little bit of a staining on the seed coat. So seeing some issues there, but overall, again, just cereal crops remain to be in fairly good condition and doing fairly well. So cereal crops looking good. Like I mentioned, seeing some early seeded winter wheat and fall rye coming through the ground. Just wanted to put up the seeding deadlines because we are in the middle of September. It's amazing how fast the month has gone. And so for fall rye and winter wheat, your seeding deadlines are the September 25th. And then for the extended ones, you got till September 30th, sorry. And so again, approaching some of those deadlines, I think a lot of producers, and like I mentioned, a lot of producers that were looking at planting winter wheat this year have had the opportunity with the rains that we had. I think the combine slowed down for a bit, and guys were able to get the fields that they wanted planted in. But I still think there's guys that are still interested in putting those acres in. It's amazing what a year like this will do for our acres. Got a feeling we're going to see jumps in both fall rye and winter wheat this year as producers had some time to get it in this year and at kind of an early time for it to get established for winter. The canola crop. Well, it's a crop this year that is definitely changed from previous years. Last year, I would say that we had a lot of straight cutting being done, and we still have a lot of straight cutting being done this year, but we're definitely seeing a lot more swathing happening in the fields. As at least in the southwest here, anyways, I've seen a lot of crop swath compared to previous years. And in talking to producers, I think some of it was to speed up harvest. Some of it was just because some producers were concerned with a little bit of the seed. They were concerned about the pod shatter and some of it not being quite as good as some of the other pod shatter varieties. So they wanted to get it in a swath just in case we did get some winds that this time of year we tend to get some winds. So it's kind of a toss up whether to put it in a swath or to let it stand. But I think a lot of the crop is still standing is the true pod shatter varieties, and those varieties a lot of producers are still straight cutting those. The other thing I've been seeing is the height of some of the canola crops, and you don't really realize it when you do your canola surveys. You kind of go in and you do what you have to do, and with the canola disease surveys and kind of get out. But now that some of the crop is either being harvested or swathed, get into some of those fields, and we got some 6 foot tall canola plants out there that are. Producers are leaving 2.5 to 3 2.5 feet of straw behind, or as they're combining, because the just that tall of a crop. So and it didn't lodge as bad this year either. A lot of it is standing up and very uniform as you go across the field. So another good thing for this year, making it for easy harvest. Getting into some of the more there's still a few fields out there that late seeded canola crops that are still in the pod fill stage, but I would say that's less than 5%. A lot of the crop has either been sprayed already or being swathed, and right now as with the our harvest production report said, we're about 35% complete. Yields again are going to average in the canola, and very similar to the other crops, with dry areas, not yielding as good, but the wet areas yielding a little bit more. Other thing, and this is regarding all crops, but especially in canola, I'm not seeing a lot of disease in a lot of the crop this year, so that's definitely going to help with the yield this year. The other thing is that with disease, we're seeing, at least what I'm seeing, is in the later seeded crops, we're seeing a little bit more disease. And talking to some of the producers that have some of the later seeded crop, what we're seeing is a lot of those fields, or what I'm seeing is a lot of those fields weren't sprayed with a fungicide, and maybe that's one reason why some of those fields are maybe just showing more disease. So overall, canola crop is doing good. Corn is done well this year. It's amazing how tall some of those fields are, and amazing how the root systems were able to take advantage of all the soil moisture we had, because even in some of the dry areas, the corn crop is done fairly well. Right now we're in the dense stage. Doesn't show it very good on this picture, but the R5 are dense stage, so we're going to be seeing some silage corn coming off here shortly. I think right now it's a time thing, and as the crews start going around doing silage, we're going to see more and more of it being done. But we're not far off some of the corn crop coming off for feed already, and I think we're going to have some pretty good tonnages this year with the stands that are out there. And the cob development isn't bad. It's maybe not quite as good as it's been in previous years, but it's still there, and the cobs seem to fill right to the top. So that's another good sign. Sunflower fields are transitioning from the back of the head, from turning yellow or green to yellow, and we're actually not too far from them. Some fields that are starting to turn brown. Some producers are starting to look closely at the maturity and kind of gauging as to when they might be looking at desiccation, but just a little bit too much moisture in a lot of those crops right yet. So I still think we're going to need a couple weeks yet. Seems like the weather's not going to get as warm as we need, and I don't know if we're going to get a killing frost, which would help out, but I think the sunflowers are going to stand for a little bit here. Again, a crop that's done fairly well this year, and not seeing a whole bunch of disease. Some later stuff coming in, but again, crop is looking pretty good. And probably one of the latest seeded crops that are not the latest seed, but the latest crops we're going to have to harvest is the soybeans. Right now, most of them are in the R7 to the R8 growth stage. And we've actually got some fields that have started to be harvested. So that's I guess a good sign. I guess it means that a lot of guys are caught up with a lot of the other crops, and are starting to get some crops and some soybeans in the bin. So far we sit about 11%. The central region is the most advanced. They're about 30% complete. And again, some kind of a common denominator. The yields have been very variable and depend on the rainfall. Right now, we're seeing yield ranges from 20 to 35 bushels an acre, which I guess is pretty good for what we've been seeing, because of when you get out into the fields, you just knew the crop wasn't going to be as good as it's been in the last couple of years. We're seeing a lot of pods that are only 3 bean pods. We're seeing not as much growth that we've seen in previous years, and just needed that good rain in August to bring on the yield. And I think a lot of areas missed it, or if you did get the rains, it weren't big enough rains to do enough to increase the yield. So going to be a little bit of a reduction in yield this year, but I think in general, I think it's going to be probably close to closer, that 30 to 35 is closer to our long-term average. So I guess it's not going to be a failure, that's for sure. It's just maybe not going to be as high as what some people were hoping for. So that's about a little bit of an update of what would have been kind of seeing in the past week out in the fields. As I mentioned, there's a lot of crop has been taken off, and I think we're going to see a lot more of that in the next week. And I can see where some producers might be getting close to finishing by the next crop report. So good sign for an early fall season. So with that, we're going to go to the crop scouting panel, and this week with the crop scouting panel, we've got a few questions that are starting to come in, and this one, because of the early harvest, producers are looking at planning and for next year. And I had one producer talking about putting on sulfur fines this fall, and he said his dealer's ready to go whenever he's ready. He was just wondering, is there a best time to apply? And that should be, and does an incorporation need to be done, example harrowing, after the sulfur fines are put on? He hasn't done that a lot in the past, and so he was just wondering to get some more information. So Marla, if you're on, I was wanting you to take this question.
Yeah, sure. I am here, Lionel. So yeah, the thing with sulfur, especially if you're looking to try to feed a canola crop for next year, it'll be a little too late to put on elemental to feed next year's crop. So if we are going into canola next year and want to put on some sulfur, if you're looking at sulfur fines as a possibility to be able to broadcast and incorporate in, the thing with sulfate is that ammonium sulfate and those sulfur fines, the ammonium part can be lost through ammonium volatilization. So if you are going to broadcast that and leave that on the surface, being able to incorporate that in would help. Harrowing is not enough incorporation to break that down or to actually kind of get it under the soil surface. But again, that's the only part. That ammonia portion is the part that could be lost to the atmosphere. The sulfate portion of those fines does not have a mechanism to be lost to the atmosphere. It does have a mechanism to be lost because it's sulfate, it's negatively charged, it can leach. So if you are in an area on, say, a sandier soil or somewhere with high precipitation, that leaching could occur. You might want to wait to put it on later in the season after those fall rains are done. But otherwise, again, you don't have that potential loss mechanism for the sulfate. And again, if you're trying to feed canola for next year, that's a better option than putting down an elemental form, because that elemental form has to actually be, broken down and oxidized by microbes, and that microbial action won't be happening over the winter because it's too cool.
Okay, and sometimes people will almost do a blend of elemental and the sulfur fines to build up sulfur. Is that something?
Yeah, so if you're looking at blending that, or something where you're putting down an elemental form, if you want to broadcast on an elemental form this fall, and really you're looking to build that soil sulfur a bit, and you're not just looking to feed next year's crop, maybe you're planning on going into like wheat this next year, and then canola is the following year in your rotation, then now is a great opportunity to be able to put that elemental form down. And once you have that elemental form down, now you've got all of next year for that to break down. In the case of an elemental form, if you're broadcasting that, it's actually best to leave that on the soil and let it weather. So if you were doing some harrowing following that for residue management, that wouldn't necessarily kind of till it fully into the ground, would scratch it around a little bit. But that elemental actually likes to have some time to physically break down that prill, to physically break down on that soil surface. And then next year, if you're doing any incorporation or not, if you're in a no-till system, that will help to kind of get the microbes going, and then they will start to oxidize it so that it's available then in that year too. So elemental is managed differently than any other kind of fertilizer. Broadcasting is great with elemental forms. and then letting them weather on the surface. It's like the opposite of every other thing that we think about when we talk about fertilizer management.
Okay, and the question just came in was regarding nitrogen and timeline for anhydrous, deep banding. Concerns? Do we need to let things cool off, or?
Yeah, your best bet when you're dealing with banding fertilizer or getting that anhydrous down is to get that down as late in the fall as possible, recognizing that obviously we're restricted by time, but we generally say wait until after Thanksgiving, because the cooler the soil is, the less time essentially there is for the ammonium form of that fertilizer to be transforming into nitrate. And at that point, it could denitrify to the atmosphere if it was really wet conditions, or could start to leach as well. So again, we generally recommend waiting until after Thanksgiving to start putting that anhydrous down.
Great. Thanks, Marla.
You're welcome.
Okay, next question is going to be for Kim. Okay, we've had some colder fall weather the last few days here, and some questions regarding spraying in cold weather. You know, we haven't had like extreme cold yet, -1. You know, can I still spray the next day? I thought it'd be a good opportunity maybe to mention some of the do's and don'ts in the cold weather. And then also the one question that came in is more and more producers are looking at fall applied edge and those type products. Is there a timeline to consider when you're putting those ones on?
Okay, thanks, Lionel. So I'll start with the fall and cold weather spraying. Basically, we want temperatures to be minimum 8 degrees and rising for at least, and at that 8 degrees and rising for at least a couple of hours. So we've got some really good spray conditions this week, and it looks like next week as well. Now things can change, you know, the weather can change on us, but it does look like we've got some good daytime temperatures for spraying. When we hit that frost, start hitting those frosts at night, whether it's we have to assess whether that's it's a killing frost or not. And I know we all did get a little bit of a frost just the other night. There was some ice on the windshields. I know here in Carmen, the grass wasn't frozen at all. So it was just, you know, a really light frost, but you really have to look at how low the temperature dipped and for how long. And so we do have some really good data on our weather stations. And I think we've showcased that before, where you can go in and find the overnight temps and you can see how long it was, you know, below zero for. Even a -1 frost sustained over several hours can do a lot of damage, but sometimes the temperature just dips down and then comes right back up again. And those frosts don't do a lot of damage, but you have to assess and see, you know, how bad it is. So normally you would wait at least a day or two after a light frost. If it was a heavier frost, you'd want to wait 2 to 3 days and see what kind of growth you're getting, whether or not, you know, because you need to have live growing tissue to spray for it to take up the chemistry and for the herbicides to work. So basically we have to assess after each frost or after all the low temperatures that we are having at night. So again, even if it's not freezing, you still want to be spraying, you know, during the warmer part of the day. And, you know, you want those plants to be actively growing and taking in that herbicide. So again, you know, minimum 8 degrees for at least a few hours during the day, and hopefully rising. So, you know, a late morning or even an early afternoon spray is ideal at that point to get those weeds. So considering products like Edge and Treflan and Avidex and Fortress and all those type of things, if you're going to be doing minimum till or zero till situation where you're not doing any incorporation of that, because some of those products, not all brand names are registered, so just check with your dealer and check and see what products you're actually putting on. But if we're talking, you know, the traditional, the Gowan products, the Edge, the Treflan, the Fortress, that type of thing, if you're applying and not incorporating, so if it's going on direct till or direct seeding situations, then you need to wait till it's a little bit colder. And I think the labels will state that you need to wait till after October 1st for all of that. You want those soils to be cold. And if you are going to be doing, you know, more conventional tillage and you're doing that first incorporation this fall, then basically anytime after probably September 15th, which is tomorrow, but really generally the cooler, the better. And we also don't want you, you know, going in and doing any more disturbance on those fields. So you need to make sure that, you know, if you are going to be putting it on a little bit earlier than then into October, then you need to make sure that, you're not going to be disturbing that anymore, because we don't want to disturb that layer of herbicide in the soil any more than we have to. And then usually it's one incorporation in the fall, and then we'll do the second incorporation in the spring. Sometimes that can be done just at tillage, depending how much dirt is thrown around with the seeder you're using. Again, that depends on the seeder and the shovels and the openers and all kinds of different things. So those are kind of a case by case scenario, but generally you do that first incorporation in the fall and then do the second one in the spring.
Okay. I've had I'm hearing a lot of advertising about fall applied authority.
Mhm.
Is there temperature concerns with applying it? Like if it's do we need to get it on when the soil's still fairly warm, or do we if it gets cold, is it too late?
Yeah, you want those sprays to be later on in the fall. Like you basically want that to be the last thing you do when you're spraying, because you want that, you don't want any disturbance, you just want to leave that. And those fields have to be ready to seed into in the spring, because you don't want to be doing any disturbance, but you don't want to be putting on those products super early. Generally, the later on in the fall is better. And that's something too, we could do a talk going over some of the, all the different products, all the different choices that are available. But generally you're waiting. It's kind of like, so it's like soil sampling with the Edge and the Avidex and the Treflon, and that you want to wait until the soils are cold and there's not a lot of microbial activity. And the same as any of our, like our Valterra and Fierce and Focus, I think, are the three that have fall registration right now. And there may be more coming that have full fall registrations, but generally it's done quite late in the fall.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kim. Next question for John Gavlosky. And I'd like to thank David Kaminsky for taking these pictures. Last week we talked a bit about the canola disease survey, and I borrowed pictures from David for the Aster's yellows, and I just been getting more and more people asking about it lately because Dave mentioned you're seeing it in the field, and I just wanted to I guess find out from John, is this a different year, or are we normally seeing these kind of levels?
Well, we're seeing a bit more this year than normal, but I wouldn't say it's nearly to the extent that we've seen, say 2012, 2001, some of the years where we had extremely high levels. We did have a fairly high population of Aster leafhoppers blow in early, late May and into early June. So we were collecting a lot of Aster leafhoppers. So there was a lot of concern out there that we could have a bad Aster yellows year. As mentioned, some is showing up, but with Aster yellows, what is really tricky is one of the symptoms is you have plants that turn purple at the top often. They have those hollowed pods. So a plant that's infected will really stand out in the crop this time of year. And if you have, say, even 1 in 20 or 30 plants infected, the field can look pretty bad. But in reality, yield loss probably isn't terrible. And I think it's one of those situations where in some fields you can find the infected plants, but overall, I don't know that it's going to have a huge impact on yield. There may be exceptions, but I haven't heard of any really bad fields this year the way we did, say, back in 2012. So it's here, maybe a bit more than we normally see, but we have seen worse. And as an FYI, that leafhopper in the upper left isn't an Aster leafhopper. It has wrong patterning.
Hey, Lionel, I think we might have lost John's audio.